Symbols. We're all...
This month you can go to McDonald's. Mr. and Mrs. Michael Jackson.
Let's talk about Longlegs. Longlegs is the latest film directed by Oz Perkins. The film follows Lee Harker, played by Maika Monroe, an FBI agent in pursuit of a serial killer as she uncovers a series of clues that she must solve to end his terrifying killing spree. Longlegs I was very excited to see. Most of the time when I get my hopes up for a new release, I always end up being disappointed in some way. So while I was super excited going into Longlegs, I tried to keep an open mind just in case it didn't end up being exactly what I wanted. And the discussion surrounding this film, which we'll talk about in a minute, certainly played into my excitement. But with that being said, I kind of loved it. Longlegs is an evil movie. The way it looks, sounds, and feels just gives the sense of pure evil. Even with the film's opening shot and sequence, it just screams in your face with its style. But thankfully I find there to be a lot of substance behind the stylistic choices, and would even argue that it doesn't push too hard to be different. As I said, the film's first sequence genuinely felt like a nightmare. It unsettled me so much that I was genuinely uncomfortable moving into the rest of the film. This is only the second film that I've seen from Oz Perkins, the first being Gretel and Hansel, which I unfortunately thought was terrible. So with that being my only reference to Oz Perkins, it is safe to say that I was worried Longlegs would end up in the same boat. Although I heavily disagree with those saying that it's the scariest film of the decade, I believe that Longlegs is certainly giving a lot of recent horror films a run for their money, at least the releases we've been seeing within the last 2 years. A lot of people are playing the comparison game with Longlegs, and the main one seems to be that it's this decade's Silence of the Lambs, which to some extent I agree and disagree with. The first film that popped into my head when I saw this was definitely Cure. It's a fantastic film. If you've never seen it, you definitely need to. The dreamlike feel and hypnotic style of Cure is actually what I think may have inspired this film a little bit. Longlegs excels in setting up an unsettling atmosphere with its sound design and score, accompanied with the film's very wide cinematography. The way that this film looks is just gorgeous. It felt like we were floating around as a bystander as Harker continued to solve these very odd murders. All of the framing really played into the psychological horror that it was going for. Really, the attention to detail within every frame is truly admirable. There's a long take where Maika Monroe's character is on the phone, and we can clearly see an open door behind her. And while I was paying attention to the dialogue, I couldn't help but just stare at that damn door. I was anxious to see if anyone would come running through. Like, seriously, fuck that damn door. Now, a lot of people are frustrated with this film's marketing for claiming it was the scariest film of the decade, but I was so confused why it was so offensive in this case, when literally almost every horror film that hits the big screen claims this. But I've seen so many films recently that are being marketed as a movie that make you want to piss your pants and call for your mommy, but unsurprisingly they end up being incredibly unscary. I remember when Talk to Me and Saint Maud were being hyped up as some of the most scariest films of all time, just for them to be fairly tame. I found Smile to be much more funny than scary.
We'll have you talking long after the credits roll.
But despite my feelings, I don't think the film's marketing was false advertising. I just don't think I agree with the general consensus on this film, and that's okay. Horror is an incredibly subjective and divisive genre. One person could be deathly afraid of snakes, but to someone else, they might even be sexually aroused. So to be criticizing the film's marketing rather than the film itself, to me, is just so stupid. Perhaps this is the unintended consequence of the great word of mouth that's been going on for the past few months. I've been hearing about this film for months, and the same thing happened with Hereditary. But I also think that that movie is much more scary than Longlegs. It's about the only thing I see being talked about online, rather than the film's performances or the cinematography. I don't think it's the scariest film of the decade, but goddamn was it still a fun movie. I mentioned performances, so let's get into that. Within the first 2 acts, Nicolas Cage has a fantastically creepy screen presence, despite being mostly obscured or off-screen, but his performance towards the end is a bit of a mixed bag for me. He certainly looks and sounds absolutely terrifying, but man, did it drop off towards the end. I found his performance towards the end to be almost on the same level as Face Off or Vampire's Kiss. I guess. At points, he's hilarious, which I hope is intentional, but there were also moments where I was just getting anxious from looking at him. The big mystery surrounding this film was how he was gonna look. They had the balls to not show him in any of the marketing, which I think was a great move, and it was pretty satisfying when we finally got to see him in the film. Maika Monroe delivers a deadpan and disturbed performance that really is the polar opposite of Cage. I won't say much other than that, but right from the beginning, you can tell that she has some sort of emotional attachment to the case. I'm trying to stay as vague as possible to avoid ruining it for you, but overall, she was pretty much made for a role like this. She was incredible. Longlegs put me in a daze, and when it ended, I struggled to form even a single sentence when trying to talk to somebody about the film. I was left in such a daze that I was happy to walk out in a bright-ass parking lot surrounded by people. It's also a movie that is very fun to talk about. It's been a while since I've seen multiple circles of people in a theater lobby talking about the film after it ended. I've seen Longlegs twice now, and both conversations I've had after were really fun, being able to just dissect the movie. Chris Stuckman said at the end of his review that Longlegs is kind of the equivalent of one of those creepy horror VHSs you'd see in a Blockbuster, and you wouldn't want to touch it or look at it just from how terrifying it looked, and I 100% agree with him. So yeah, Longlegs. Go see it and form your own opinion. I'm giving it a solid 8 out of 10. And I'm pretty concrete on the score. This shit's my bread and butter, what can I say? Go see it and form your own opinion, and if you've seen it, let me know what you thought in the comments. I'd like to hear everybody's opinion. Let me in now.